All right, so imagine you're walking into this like high stakes meeting, right? And everyone's talking about China, their tech scene, all that. But instead of just, the usual headlines, you come in with this deep dive knowledge, really get into what's driving this whole tech revolution. That's what we're doing today.
Sounds
We
fascinating.
found this really insightful article, and it goes way beyond just saying, oh, China's dominant. It's about the why, the how, what it means for all of us, down the line.
And I'm guessing that's where our expertise comes in.
Exactly. So for our listeners who maybe haven't had a chance to dig into the article yet, what would you say is the biggest takeaway, the thing that'll really make them stop and think?
Well, get ready to rethink some assumptions because this article reveals that China now leads in a staggering 90% of critical technologies. Yeah.
90%.
Yeah.
Seriously. That's a massive shift. I think a lot of us, we still picture China as like the manufacturing giant.
It's a common perception for sure. But the reality is it's way more complex now. This isn't about cheap labor or just copying Western ideas anymore. This is about setting the agenda for what's next, the future of tech.
That's a bold statement.
Yeah.
So how did they pull off such a dramatic shift? I mean, we're talking about just a couple of decades, right?
Right. And the article points to four key factors that have all come together to create this, well, you could call it a perfect storm of innovation.
A perfect storm. I like that. Okay, so let's break it down. What's the first ingredient in this recipe for tech dominance?
First, they've cultivated this really unique innovation ecosystem. And it's not just the government pouring money into things or this entrepreneurial spirit, in isolation. It's the synergy between the two. It's like a well-choreographed dance.
Okay, so I'm intrigued. How does this dance work?
So the government, they identify the strategic industries. Then they inject targeted support funding, favorable policies, infrastructure. They set the stage.
So the government sets the stage, and
Then the entrepreneurs come in with that characteristic drive, the rapid-fire innovation. But they're not just innovating in a vacuum. They're operating in a fiercely competitive landscape. It's constantly pushing them, forcing them to adapt, improve, all at breakneck speed.
it's like a high-pressure, high-reward environment.
Exactly. And the article, it gives this crazy example. China's R&D spending between 1995 and 2021, it shot up by 3,299%.
Whoa.
Yeah, no, that's not a typo. That's fueling their breakthroughs in fields like, AI, biotech, all those cutting edge areas.
That's not just an increase. That's an explosion. No wonder they're making waves.
All right, so we've got government support, this intense entrepreneurial spirit. What's next in the mix?
This is where I think things get really interesting, really strategic. While a lot of Western nations, they're focused on, established economies, China's looking ahead, they're investing heavily in developing countries, and their vehicle for doing that is the Belt and Road Initiative, the BRI. Ah, the BRI. That's their massive infrastructure project, right?
Yep.
Roads, railways all across continents.
Exactly. It's about connecting China to the world, but specifically, it strengthens ties with developing countries, particularly in what we call the Global South.
So they're investing in regions that other major players might be overlooking.
Yeah, I think overlooking is a good way to put it. And it's a long-term play, right? Because 85% of the world's population, it's in developing countries. China sees that. They recognize the potential.
It's like they're playing a different game, right? Not just focused on the here and now, but building influence for the future.
Mm.
All right, we've got 2 ingredients down, 2 to go. What's next?
Okay, so this one might surprise you. China's domestic market. It's incredibly competitive.
Really, I always had this image of it being, tightly controlled, top down.
Sure, there's definitely government influence, no doubt about that. But within that framework, Chinese companies are in a constant battle royale for market share. And that pressure cooker, it forces innovation at an incredible pace.
So survival of the fittest, only the strong survive.
Exactly. Only the most adaptable, the most innovative. And that constant pressure within China, it creates companies that are ready to go global. They can compete on a world stage.
It's like a training ground almost.
Right.
Do you have an example of this cutthroat competition playing out?
Oh, absolutely. The electric vehicle market is a prime example. So when Tesla first went into China, they were it. Top dog, no question. Then Chinese companies like BYD, NIO, they emerged, and suddenly you have hundreds of these EV companies all vying for a piece of the pie.
Wow.
Yeah, and that fierce competition, it pushed everyone to innovate like crazy at lightning speed. And the result, well, companies like BYD, they've actually surpassed Tesla in total car sales now. That's the power of this environment.
That's a heck of a turnaround. Okay, so we're on to the final ingredient. What's the last piece of this puzzle, this China tech dominance puzzle?
It's the most obvious one, but it's easy to overlook. Their massive domestic consumer base. We're talking 1.4 billion consumers. And the middle class alone, the ones driving a lot of this tech consumption, bigger than the entire US population.
Wow, that's almost unimaginable, that kind of scale.
Right, and what that means is Chinese companies, they can achieve massive scale. They can saturate their domestic market before they even think about going global. It's a huge leg up.
So they have this built-in market to test, refine, scale their products, their services, all at a level most countries can only dream of.
Exactly. And that success at home, it becomes a magnet. It attracts global companies, investors. Everyone wants a piece of that. It's a self-reinforcing cycle of growth, innovation, all of it.
So they've created this powerful feedback loop. The bigger they get in China, the more attractive they are globally, and on it goes.
You got it. It's a key factor in their success.
All right, so let's recap. China's tech dominance. It's not some accident, right? It's this powerful combination of factors. We got the innovation ecosystem, the strategic investments, that cutthroat domestic market, and of course the sheer size of their consumer base. All these ingredients, they come together to create this tech powerhouse that's honestly reshaping the world. But what does that mean for us, the average person? I think that's what we really need to dig into next.
Yeah, that's the billion-dollar question right there. What does all this mean for, the average person just going about their day?
It's one thing to list out the factors, right, the ingredients. But yeah, the real question is, how does this translate into the real world? Should we be worried? Are we excited? Is it too early to tell? Exactly. So less about sounding the alarm and more about, understanding the long game here. How about some concrete examples of how this is all playing out?
Okay, so let's take clean energy, for example. Remember how we talked about that fierce competition in China? Well, those companies, they're not just battling each other anymore. They're actually leading the charge globally in things like renewable energy.
So it's not just about being dominant within China's borders. They're setting the pace for everyone.
Exactly. And this is where things get even more interesting. The article highlights this trend of partnerships forming between Chinese companies and Western companies. And it makes sense, right? To tackle these huge global challenges, climate change being a big one, it requires working together, not just competing.
So instead of this tech Cold War, we're actually seeing more cooperation.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. And the article gives some really compelling examples, like Ford, the classic American car company, right? Well, they're partnering with CATL, which is this Chinese EV battery giant, to build a massive battery plant right here in Michigan.
Wow. So even with all the, political stuff happening in the background, we're seeing American companies using Chinese technology, building factories on U.S. soil.
It really shows you how, when it comes to business to technological progress, pragmatism often wins out over politics. And the reality is Chinese companies are now leaders in a lot of these fields. So collaborating with them, well, it's often the most efficient way to innovate and move forward.
It's like there's this underlying current of, collaboration happening,
Yeah.
even with all the geopolitical stuff going on.
Absolutely. And it goes beyond just sharing technology, too. You know how Western automakers used to be the mentors helping China develop its car industry?
Yeah, the classic story of industrial transfer, right?
Right. Well, now those same Western automakers, especially the big names like Audi, BMW, they're actually looking to Chinese EV makers for guidance on how to compete in this new world.
Wow, so the student has become the master in a way.
Exactly. And it just goes to show how quickly things can change in tech and how crucial it is to be willing to adapt to learn from anyone, anywhere in the world. So we've gone from China as this manufacturing powerhouse to this global tech leader actually shaping the direction of entire industries.
It's a lot to process, that's for sure.
It really is. And I think the key for our listeners is to understand that this isn't some far-off future. This is happening right now. And it's affecting everything from the products we use every day to, the jobs we have.
It's such a good point. It's easy to get caught up in the abstract.
Yeah.
But this is about real people's lives.
Yeah.
Real implications. So as we start to wrap up this part of our deep dive, what's the one key takeaway you want our listeners to walk away with? It's like we're watching this huge shift happen right in front of us, not just about China itself, but the whole global tech landscape, how it all works now, and I guess figuring out where we all fit in.
Yeah, and the article, it really drives that point home. Like, it doesn't sugarcoat it, but it ends on this surprisingly optimistic note, I thought.
Oh, optimistic. Okay, because it's easy to get stuck in the competitive mindset with these kinds of shifts. Like, oh no, what does this mean? Are we losing?
Exactly. But the article argues, instead of this us versus them when it comes to China's tech rise, we should be looking at it as this, opportunity for collaboration, for everyone to benefit.
Okay, so not about clinging to how things used to be or, trying to recreate some past version of the tech world.
Exactly. It's more like, okay, this is the playing field now, so how do we move forward in a way that benefits everybody? Like the article argues that by, working together, sharing knowledge, finding that common ground, we can actually leverage China's strengths to address these global challenges we all face.
That's a really interesting way to look at it, especially like, with so many headlines focusing on I don't know, the rivalry, the competition aspect.
Yeah.
But if we were to actually move towards this, like, more collaborative future, what would that actually look like?
Right. And I think the article does a great job of wrapping up with this thought-provoking question that I think kind of gets at that.
All right, hit me with it. What's the question that's going to have our listeners, thinking about this long after the episode's over?
It basically asks, given that China's tech dominance is the new reality, how can we work within this landscape? And I'm paraphrasing a bit here, but to create a future that works for everyone, not just a select few.
Ooh, that is a powerful question. Like a call to action almost. Not just to observe what's happening, but to think about our role in it, right?
Hmm.
How we can each contribute to something bigger.
Totally.
Yeah.
And it's not about ignoring the complexities or pretending, the competition doesn't exist. It's more like recognizing that we're all more interconnected than ever and finding those ways to work together. It's not optional anymore.
This has been such an insightful conversation, really. We went from like unpacking what's driving China's rise to now, grappling with what this new reality means for all of us, on a global scale is definitely a new era we're entering. And collaboration, innovation, those are going to be key.
Absolutely. Things are changing fast, but that conversation, it needs to keep happening.
For sure. And for our listeners, that's your cue to join in. How can we each play a role as individuals, as businesses, whatever it might be, in shaping a future where technology, brings us together instead of dividing us further? It's a big one to ponder, but as we've seen today, sometimes the most important questions are, this is the deep dive, signing off. Until next time, when we'll dive into another fascinating topic, unpack it all that good stuff.